Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've all had a good early autumn. I think we are starting to definitely get into the colder days of the year. My name is Deanna Wolf, and I am the Senior Consultant for Trusts and Foundations at Money Tree Fundraising. I am doing the monthly Q&A live as we have been doing on Trust Fundraising Hub, Trust Fundraising Hub on here on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and then on the Money Tree Fundraising page on LinkedIn. We are here most Thursdays at most Thursdays once a month at 12:15 on the third Thursday, that is. And I'm going to be answering some of the questions that have come up this month on Trust Fundraising Hub, as well as a few other things that have been going on. First of all, what I'd like to talk about is last week, or yesterday rather, it's been a very busy week already. It seems to have flown by. Yesterday, we had a conversation. I had a conversation with Mandy Hines over at Fundraising Everywhere in their Trust Fundraising Cost of Living Crisis webinar. It went really well. And I think one of the main things that needs to come out of that, if you weren't able to watch it, is stay calm. Trusts and foundations have been there for a long time. They will probably be there if they are still around after the COVID pandemic. They will probably still be around. And yes, this is a little bit of wet finger in the air. I have no scientific facts behind this, but I've been through a number of global recessions in my life, probably about 10. The market always goes up, then the market goes down, then the market goes up, then the market goes down. This is a particularly volatile period of time because of the government situation and because we're coming out of COVID and because we're coming out of, and the dust still hasn't settled from Brexit. Investments are changing and it's going to be an unsteady landscape for a while with an awful lot of competition. That said, trusts and foundations, being the long-term fundraising income stream that they are, they're not really necessarily the best ones to go to for getting emergency money for cost of living crisis. There are other income streams. Major donors is going to be a big one right now. Some of the other income streams are still recovering themselves and are subject to the issues going on with Brexit and the cost of living crisis and other things as people have less money to go around. My suggestion is get yourself a really, really clear cost of living or increased cost of living and slightly urgent case for support, or a template application. Approach some of the new funders that you've identified if you have. Keep in mind that if they've been publicly identified and put on a lot of websites, chances are everyone's going to be applying to them. So your competition for any small amount of money is going to be huge. But if you think that you match what they do really well and you've got a really good case for support and a really good justification of why you need additional money, don't be greedy. Go in and ask for money. You might get on their landscape, you might get some, but keep in mind it's speculative. Otherwise, I would go and talk to your current funders if you are looking that you are going to have difficulties delivering as promised in any of your grants. Go in and talk to those funders and talk to them about what your situation is. They may offer you more time. They may allow you to deliver to a reduced number of people. They may allow you to get more money because sometimes there are some really good funders out there, especially if they've already funded you. They may give you a top up. And I know that that's happening with some funders. If you're not eligible, don't waste your time going for the funder. If they've said, if you're eligible and they've said we're only giving to our current grantees, don't waste your time going to them. Go and find other funders. Otherwise, follow really good practice for trust fundraising. Do your research. Apply to those that you meet the guidelines for. If you're applying speculatively, be aware that chances are you might not get the money. In fact, chances are greater that you're not than you will. But factor that in. It's worth the ask. Always worth the ask if it's worth getting the funding, but it may not necessarily be the best time to get the ask. And you may not get it, which means that you have to do more applications. Target well, ask appropriately. Don't ask for more money than what you've got and what you need, and follow the need over want mantra that I've been telling people about. I think it feels like since forever. Trusts give to need rather than want, and they give to a really good business case with some heart rather than just a lot of heart and the emergency appeal panic. Don't panic. This isn't the time to panic. This is the time to take a step back, take a look at what you're doing, and then go from there. Get a plan and go from there. If you've got a work plan already, work as far as you can to the work plan you've got, and it will go well. So we've got some questions that have come up over the course of the last month, some of which are have been answered quite well, but I thought I would answer some of them because they tend to get lost a little bit. One of them is, hello, can you please help? And there's been a number of these questions on interviews, which is what they're asking for. Charities are going out to employ their first ever or a new trust fundraiser, and they're interviewing very quickly, and they're looking for interview questions. I'm not going to give you any questions right now. What I would do is take a look at, what do you want the person in post to be able to do? Do you, not necessarily just what's in the job description and what the skills are, those are the kinds of questions you can ask, and hopefully they've answered that in the question and in their cover letter or their application to you. But if you want to dig deeper, talk about, when have they solved a problem? Because failure and not winning a grant is a big thing here, and being able to accept the rejection that happens as a result of trust fundraising is always really important. So how do they do that? You want to make sure that you've got someone who knows that they're going to have resilience. They've got a plan in place, or they've got a practice in place that allows them to be able to answer those questions and deal with the fact that on any given day you might get 10 rejections. That's really hard to deal with. Do they know how to do it? So you want to ask questions around that. I would also ask questions about, and get them to tell you a story, whether that's writing it down right away in their own words, whether it is telling you over the course of a couple of minutes. Our job is storytelling. It may be answering all the questions that are in an application, but we also have sometimes 2, maybe 3 pages to get across why we are the best people to get the funding that a given trust or foundation has. Can they tell you a story? Does it have a narrative flow to it, a beginning, middle, and end, or an end, a beginning, middle, and an end? Does it follow typical things? Those are the kinds of things that people, when you're reading 1,000 applications, you don't want it to be hard work. Being able to tell a story across the course of an entire application will help you do that. You might want to ask about how, and ask questions around how they would approach their first 3 months. That might be an exercise that you give them in advance, but how would they approach their first 3 months in the job? That's often the probation period, 3 to 6 months. What are they going to do? They know a very little bit about your organization because they're not in it yet. So how are they going to get into it? What kinds of critical thinking activities are they going to be doing? And what you're looking for is to find out, can they think, can they approach, can they plan? Because what we also do, besides storytelling, is planning and approaching and having a strategy on how to get from point A to point Z. So those are the kinds of questions you want to do, and finding out whether enough about them to find out whether within reason and within employment law that they're going to be a good fit for your organization personality wise. You can have the best person on paper and they come in and they're just the wrong personality for your organization, which doesn't mean they're the wrong person, which doesn't mean that they're a bad person or that they're not appropriate. It just means that another person may fit your organization better. Also, when they say they're an experienced fundraiser, find out when they're an experienced fundraiser. Is a trust fundraiser, if you've only been doing trust fundraising since the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic started, to now, you've not really had a good sense of how trusts actually work, because things changed very, very differently in that time period. So my suggestion to you is definitely make sure that you are getting someone who understands what the typical trust fundraising process from beginning to end is and what all's involved. If they happen to have only been doing it in this time period, find out what skills they have, and have they done customer service? Have they done fundraising in other areas? what kinds of transferable skills do they have, and see if they can identify them. A good trust fundraiser can think on their feet to a certain extent, although it is always good to give somebody the answers ahead of time. As trust fundraisers, we often work to things on paper and to questions that have been asked elsewhere. So, and we have time to think about it. That draws a certain personality to the job role. So make sure that the questions are available ahead of time. We've recently done a hiring process ourselves here at Moneytree, and we gave the questions out ahead of time. And it actually, based on previous times when we've interviewed for, say, associates, it made a massive difference. People had time to think, and they gave very considered answers. As trust fundraisers, we need time to think to give very considered answers to our applications and to the potential funders that we're going to. So mimic that process, and you should be able to do well. We also had a question, and this is sort of around it, for people who are working from home. Is their charity planning to cover the costs of their heating a room in their house if you work in it? If you've chosen to work at home, that's often your responsibility. Those are if a funder says you have to work from home, there you may have that as some of those benefits and those extras thrown into your salary, that some of those costs are being covered. But for the most part, if you work from home, a certain percent you can put in for a minimum percentage, definitely a default value, but there's also ways on HMRC to figure out how much of your home office, you can claim against your taxes if you are doing it. If you are doing just plain PAYE and you're not putting in a self-assessment, often you don't have to put in that calculation, but everyone can apply for, if you're working from home for a certain amount of time, everyone can apply for the default value from HMRC, and that information will be on the HMRC web pages, and I would go to them to find that out. We've also had a question about downloading your charity's entry in your National Charity Regulators database, and they're not sure, the person wasn't sure whether that was their governing document or not. It isn't. Your governing document could be your memorandum of association and terms. It could be your any of the documents you've filed with your charity regulator. What they're looking for is the charity regulator's file on you. So if you've applied to Charity Commission, that information should be on the Charity Commission or on Oscar if you've got a charity number, or the Office of the Charity Regulator, the Charity Commission for Northern Ireland. You will have a record on there, and it may just be that you need to take a screenshot of their pages or download their pages and save them as PDFs and then upload them in the application itself. Or, and I would probably do this as well, give them the reference number that you have on the Charity Commission site. Possibly once you go into the Charity Commission site or an Oscar site or Charity Commission Northern Ireland, go in and copy the URL on that page, on your record, and then just add that in. That's what they're looking for, it's their way of doing due diligence. Your governing document, they'll ask for specifically if they're looking for it. We've also had a question about CEO salary and what percentage they should be in a very small charity of circa 220,000 pounds or more. I would say a very small charity may be, or less. I would say that's just a small charity. The majority of charities in the UK are probably under 250,000 pounds income. Although there's an awful lot of charities that think that 1 million counts you as, anything under 1 million is small, but those are often, the people who are looking that way are often the really big charities, and there's not that many of them that are earning over 10 million pounds a year. I would say it's commensurate to do the duties that they're doing. If they're the sole employee, and often in very small organizations like that, if you're only bringing in 220,000 a year, chances are you've only got 1 or 2 employees. And I am making vast suppositions here, so please don't necessarily quote me on that, but it's my assumption. I would say your maximum overall, your percentage of your salary is going to be how much that person, you need to pay to keep that person in place. take a look at what other charities are paying their CEOs in your income bracket. You'll know who else is roughly your competitors. I would go and take a look on the Charity Commission or on Oscar and take a look in their accounts. If the salaries will be listed there, if they've only got one or two members of staff, the salaries will be listed, and it'll give you a good idea. Keep in mind, if you're bringing that in, how much work are they doing? If they're doing all the work of a charity, then they deserve to be paid. And if they're doing a full-time job, then they deserve to be paid what a full-time job is paying them. Don't assume that someone who's running the organization and is responsible for everything should be paid very little because they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Right now, we've all got bills to pay. So I would say, I don't know, take a look. There is salary income, salary charts about who's paying what, and they come out on an annual basis. I know Bruce Tate Associates up here in Scotland does it. I think Charity Commission, or sorry, CIOF may do some charity banding and income banding of what salaries generally are. It's easy enough to do a quick Google search to find out some of that information. I would say your percentage overall overheads against your total organizational budget, that's going to depend on what you do. If you've got everyone's working from home, then your overheads are really quite low because everyone's covering your overheads, which are things like rent and phone and computer and Wi-Fi and heating and electricity and post. A lot of those costs are going to be covered already by the people who are living at home. So it's going to depend. Some places are thinking about, I think the cost of fundraising shouldn't be more than 30% of your costs. But it really will depend. Your overheads could be, if you're running a hospice, your overheads could be vastly different than if you're running a counseling group where you meet in a rented room once a week. And so keep that in mind. What I would say is that in an application, any of your applications, I would put in a subtotaled line after you've got your project costs in. I would put in about 10%, 10 to 15% for your overhead costs and include that on everything. I do it as a separate line when I do applications, so that funders don't, if they refuse to give overheads, they'll still give me potentially my costs for doing the project itself. Otherwise, if you do get it and you've included it and they give you the total amount you've asked for, what I would do is make sure that when that money comes in, that your finance team, whether that's an individual or the CEO themselves or you, that money goes directly into your sort of unrestricted costs for covering core costs. And it's going to depend. I would say that if your overhead costs generally cost more than your project costs, like your total project costs across the board, that's not very good. And if you're putting in an application and the amount you're asking for your project costs less than the individual application's project costs, then your overheads are too high. Just because funders will look at it and go, hold on, we're paying more for the organization than we are for the project, but you're asking for the project. We're going to pay the project costs and not any of your overheads. So keep that in mind and just be realistic. And it's common sense, mainly, for the most part. Trust fundraising is common sense. The next question we got is, I'm at the start of an application which asks, do you have an ethical policy for fundraising? And if not, please explain why this is not considered necessary. Ooh, having an ethical fundraising policy used to be having a fundraising policy, which used to be part of the fundraising or the finance policy, which is I think the adding of ethical in there means that you've thought about the implications of why you've made the decisions on what you're going to do. So a fundraising policy generally says this is what you will and will not accept. This is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. I would add the ethical side of it gives a very good why as to what your reasoning is behind those decisions. And making them ethical is what works for your organization ethically, and does that work within the context of the world you're working in. if you're working in health and social care, your ethical fundraising policy needs to address the main issues that are present in health and social care. That includes safeguarding and when you will accept money from someone and when you won't, what kinds of organizations you'll accept it from, and why. So it's going to be different from organization to organization. There are templates out there. I did a very quick ethical fundraising policy template Google search, and I got a number of sites that have them. Whatever you do, don't copy them point blank. It's just like GDPR privacy policies. Don't copy someone else's. Use someone else's as a guideline and make sure that it pertains completely and perfectly to your organization. The other thing is, if you're going to a site and getting a template policy, see what information you have to give to that organization before you are able to download their ethical template or any of their templates. If you're getting a template and they ask you for an awful lot about information about your organization, you want to be very careful, because why are they asking for that information? Also, if you're asking for that and they're asking for that and you give it because you've got it, because we're trust fundraisers, we have access to an awful lot more organizational specific and priority data than and proprietary data about our organizations because of the applications we fill in. Be aware, would your manager, when you fill those things in, would your manager agree for you to fill those in? Would their manager agree for you to fill that information in and pass that information to anyone other than a potential fundraiser or a potential funder? So it's a good idea to have a fundraising policy. It means that when you get money that's coming in that you're not sure if you should accept it or not, you can say the policy says we don't. So it helps if funders are going to argue with you. It helps with the whole idea of money laundering and where you're getting your funding from. We've had countless articles and news stories about organizations that are getting money from what people think later on is quite a dodgy source. And so they want to be careful going forward that your ethics match their ethics. Don't make your ethical policy match the ethical policy of your funders. Make it match the views and the policies and the personality of your charity. That's often, and ethical fundraising policies, you might be asked to write it, but it's definitely something the trustees need to look at, because they're going to be the final word, and the chair of the trustees are going to be the final word on whether a donation can be accepted or not. Let's see, I've got time for just a couple more. One of the questions was, is anyone starting to see a pattern of local funders prioritizing smaller charities? I would say local funders generally tend to prioritize smaller charities unless your local funder is a massive charity. If you're going local, you're going to go, a lot of times the local charities are smaller ones. If you're local and you are a big charity and you're going to a small local charity to ask for funding or local trust, I would really be very clear and make sure that you've got a very clear understanding of what they fund. Make your ask commensurate with the levels of gifts that they give, and start having a really good conversation to start building a strong relationship with them. Little amounts of money coming in, people poo-poo it, I hear all the time. They want to go for the big grants, which are very competitive. I don't think people quite understand. Just because they're giving out £50,000 in a gift doesn't mean that they're giving out 100 £50,000 gifts. It might be that they give out one, and if thousands of people apply for it, you're up against thousands. Little gifts can give you lots of money, and it can come in unrestricted, so, and often has very little stewardship involved. A thank you letter once a year or an update of what's going on is not a lot of stewardship. And the admin, yes, it's there, but that's if you've got somebody who's brand new in the role, this is a good way for them to start figuring out what's going on and keeping the stewardship and the cultivation of small funders in place. But I would say local funders are probably giving to smaller charities because they've always been giving to smaller charities, because local funders often have smaller amounts of money to give. There is a question about advice and tips on contacting a trust for the first time prior to submitting an application. and that's coming from Emma originally in the funds, or in the Trust Fundraising Hub. Yes, I would make sure you're not, find out what you want to ask them. Why do you want to ask them a question? Why do you want to contact them? If it's just because you want to start a relationship, a lot of smaller funders, and a lot of funders now, unless they're really, really big, often don't want to talk to you until after they've decided they're going to give you a gift, because otherwise they'd have to talk to thousands of people and they just don't have time, because they're often volunteers. If you're calling up to ask questions, make sure your questions are, you're confirming what you've found on a third-party site. Say, one of the trust fundraising databases, research databases that's out there, whether it's subscription or free. Whether you're confirming if addresses are still correct based on what's on Oscar, or on Charity Commission of Northern Ireland, or the Charity Commission of England and Wales, which is short form to Charity Commission. Find out if they say you can submit anytime, ask for things like, ask them about, you don't want to submit an application now, and the deadline, the trust meeting date is actually 6 months from now. You want to submit closer to the date so that they get more accurate information. And that's what I say is often, I want to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date information before you make a decision. I would also ask to confirm who it's sent to, if you want to send it under the name of an individual rather than just a blanket to the trustees. And you could ask if they give a woman's name and they don't give a pronoun, ask if, or a designation, is it a Miss, a Mrs, or a Ms? My default is always a Ms, just because most people don't get very upset with it when you don't know. If someone indicates that it's a Mrs, definitely put down a Miss or a Mrs. If they indicate it's a Miss, definitely put down it's a Miss, because if they're making the distinction, then that they want that distinction in there. I would definitely get in touch if you have to. Don't ask any questions that are on their website and that they've given answers for, or if it's updated on a research database and it tells you when it was last updated and that's within the last 3 months, I wouldn't necessarily ask for any updates, just because you're wasting their time. So those are my tips. If they give you a phone number, you can call. If they give you a phone number and they say don't call, follow their instructions. Trusts are follow their instructions. There's a reason they have got the instructions in there. It's to help them manage what they do. I would say there's another question here. When applying for wage costs, is there a typical or standard added on cost percentage people use? Somewhere along the line, I heard 30%. And I have no idea where I found that out. I've been doing this I've been doing trust fundraising for a long time. And so it could have just been that it's been a number that's been bandied about for a very long time. And that's it. There's no rhyme, reason, or science behind it. What you can do is, if you know the salary of the person, you will generally know what their employer's national insurance and your employer's pension contributions will be, and those are the on costs that you would add. So if you're doing it, if you don't know the salary, if you're putting in for a wage, you'll know the salary, which means you'll know what the national insurance contributions and pension contributions your employer will be having and including. And if you don't know those already, get in touch with HR or finance, because if you've got a salary band, you'll know what those are. And then just add it specifically. It's easier to add it specifically. That's basically it. What I will say is, when you're adding inflation right now, it used to be that we'd add, inflation was about 3%. And if you're doing a multi-year budget, you'd add 3% off the top. Sometimes those weren't it, and you had a very flat budget from beginning to end. And that meant that right now people are dealing with cost of living crisis, when the prices not just are going up because of regular inflation, but they're going massively up because we're entering a massive crisis. It was 9% for a wee while across sort of an average across the board. Yesterday, I heard on the news it's gone up to 10.5%. I would say, if you're not putting a cost, if you're not putting an inflation cost in on multi-year budgets, or if you're putting in a budget now for 6 months from now, I would make sure that whatever costs you're doing now just indicate that it's going to be 6% more or 10% more when you're putting your actual numbers in. Otherwise, you're going to get it and you're not going to have enough money. So, right, we're coming to the end. It was a quick time. Thank you, everybody, for asking lots of questions on Trust Fundraising Hub. That's exactly what the website and the Facebook page is there for, is getting the hive mind answering questions. I know I have answers. I don't have all the answers, and there are sometimes multiple answers to the questions that we get and that we answer on this Q&A. So if it doesn't quite ring true for you, but it still makes a lot of sense, there's more than one way to skin this cat. Just remember that. Our next Trust Q&A live will be on Thursday, November the 17th at 12:15. In the meantime, and I'll be speaking with Jeff Breen of Fundify, which is going to be a new trust database that's coming, research database that's coming out, and he's getting a fair number of trust fundraisers to test it out. I've been one of them. It's looking good so far. They are making changes based on the questions and the things that we have been, that I know that myself and other people are going to be and have fed back to them. So hopefully it will end up being an all-seeing, all-doing, possibly really good database. But we'll be talking about all things trust research. Someone's just said that's the day they fly to the States. Keep in mind, this is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back. It goes live almost immediately after, or it goes on to recording within a few minutes of me hitting the button. So thanks very much. Best wishes for your fundraising. Stay warm, and add an extra jumper on if you're keeping the heat off until November if you can. Bye-bye.